Welcome to Illusion HorrorCon 2025. You are about to hear a recorded panel discussion featuring game designers, writers, and community members from across the tabletop role-playing space. Please note that the views and opinions expressed during these panels are those of the individual panelists and moderators and do not necessarily reflect the views of Illusion Horror and Con, its organizers, sponsors, or partners. These discussions may include mature themes, critical perspectives, and personal experiences related to tabletop role-playing games, horror, and creative work. Listener discretion is advised. Panel topics are intentionally open to the attendees' interpretation. Our moderator and panelists are encouraged to explore the subject freely, share their own experiences, and engage in thoughtful discussion. Time has also been set aside for audience questions and contributions. This recording is part of the Illusion HorrorCon 2025 Untethered Realities. For more information about the convention, upcoming and past events, please visit our website or join us on Discord. And now, let's begin the panel.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Illusion Horror and Con. This is panel 5.5, and we are here to talk about realistic character development for horror RPGs and the development of NPCs. Basically, we are here to just have a nice chat, mostly. So let's go through some introductions. Just to let you guys know, my name is Bear Winters. I go by he, him. I am the creative director for Tap'em Systems and the lead designer on Project Biomodus, Shores of Sheol, and the upcoming Treadpunk. And I've also worked as an illustrator for some games as well, for books published by, or a book published by Onyx Path. But yeah, I'm going to be your moderator today. Hopefully going to give you guys some good questions that are not going to be too awful. And yeah, let's go from my left to right, I think. So let's start with Mav.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mav Hensey. My pronouns are they, them. I am the head of Mythos for the Old Ways. I run Call of Cthulhu, Trail of Cthulhu, Cthulhu Dark, and all sorts of various tentacly things. We're currently running Trail of Cthulhu, a campaign that I wrote myself called Silver Screams, set in 1930s Hollywood. I'm also cast member on Ain't Slayed Nobody. We just finished up our Down Bleaker Trails campaign, so have some fun with that. You can find me on the Symphony Entertainment streams as well, and sometimes places like How We Roll, Miskatonic Playhouse, and various and sundry other things. I'm also a Miskatonic repository author. You can find my scenarios under the name Rena Hensey. I've got 11, I think, the most recent being Hot Bro Summer, a early aughts ode to reality television of the era. I've got a scenario coming out in Year of the Goat, spearheaded by Evan Perlman and Heinrich Moore, and a few other shenanigans in the pipeline that will hopefully be out soon.
We all love shenanigans. And shout out to the Symphony Entertainment as well. Sean.
Hi, I'm Sean Creef, he, him. I am not nearly as prolific on the internet, but I mostly do freelancing for Onyx Path these days. Not as much in the horror field, but I did get on the White Wolf Wiki, and that counts for something. And the only place you can really find me right now, I guess, is Start Playing.
Nice. Well, welcome in. Let's move to Alandra.
Hello, my name is Alandra Hileman, aka Lady Bedivere. My pronouns are she, her. You can find me everywhere on the internet at Lady Bedivere. I'm mostly known as Queen of the One-Shots over on Quests and Chaos. You can sometimes also find me on Vanna Loswin or Miskatonic Playhouse. And while my game publishing is nowhere near everybody else's resume, I am a playwright and have wrote many a comedy horror play that you can find through the New Play Network.
Excellent. Well, great to have you. Topher, on to you. We can't hear you if you're saying something. Oh no. Our first
No, you can
technical
hear me.
hitch. There you
You
go.
can hear me. I just needed to turn my soundboard on.
Ah.
Hey everybody, I'm Topher, and I'm plagued by tech problems apparently. I'm he him. Most of what I do is professional game mastering, primarily on Start Playing. I am published by Helmgast. I have a couple things on DM's Guild you can find under Topher Burk. But I've been doing this forever, so.
Great to have you as well. And then Camille, over to you, last time.
Hello, everybody. I'm Camille, they, them pronouns, and I do a lot of actual plays. I'm mainly in How We Roll. For example, you might know me as the voice of Jane Farewell from our Two-Headed Serpent campaign, or potentially Minerva Schmidt, also from our Two-Headed Serpent campaign, and a whole host of other weird and wonderful characters in lots of other systems. Yeah, kind of just fell into horror actual play and been having a blast with it. Yeah, I'm super excited to talk about some realistic character development today. Not that I say my characters are very realistic, but you know.
The conversation is a case of do as I say, not as I do. Sometimes I think. With these things,
Indeed.
But yeah. So we're gonna start this off with a pretty easy layup question, and thank you all again very much for being here. I am singularly honored to be able to get to talk to you all with your various breadth of experiences. So let's go into very simple question. What game have you played or worked on that has a good example of realistic character development, and is there a specific system that you think encourages it within that game? So we're going to go reverse order for this question, and this is the only question where I'm going to have an answer from each of you. Every other question we're going to ask is just going to be freeform spitballing. So Camille, let's start with you.
Sure thing. Yeah, I had to think about this. And I was thinking, what sort of scenario have I played in recently where it felt like I was achieving some realism. There was kind of a bit of a goal there for it. And I actually had the pleasure and delight of playing in Mav's campaign they ran for us and How We Roll recently of Friends of Dorothy, one of their scenarios. And that was an amazing experience. Thank you, Alandra. Such a good campaign. Yeah, I think that was such a wonderful experience. It was like a heartrending and in some ways like full-on experience because a lot of it is around centering queer characters from the 80s, so things were not always a great time for all of us, and I think that maybe perhaps not so much through the system and mechanics thereof, using Call of Cthulhu, was that kind of like explicitly encouraging realism in that way. But in terms of sort of the focus of the campaign and the writing behind it, in terms of kind of focusing in on particular kind of queer experiences, particularly like queer people in the military. And so I think that we played it with an all queer cast as well, which I don't think you have to do that for that scenario or any kind of queer focus scenario, but I guess we kind of had an aim to draw on some of our own experiences and bring that into the play. And I think that made for a really interesting experience for me of something that felt very real and sort of very kind of, emotionally connecting. So, and again, you don't always have to play what you know to make it realistic, but it can really help.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that's my example. So just plug in Mav's gorgeous scenario there.
Perfect. Topher, you're up.
All right. Let's see. A game with realistic character creation. None of the games I play are very realistic in any way. But we all need to have realistic characters. So I am going to take a different track on this. And what game makes a character appropriate for the game setting? Because if you have an appropriate character for the setting, then you can fill in all the details. And I've got two games in mind, and the first one is if you haven't played it, you should. It's Cult Divinity Lost. And if you experience it from the position of a sleeper, you start off with a character with no advantages, only disadvantages, and your character is broken in some horrible way, and you can't put your finger on what it is. It's very much real. And Yeah, so there's that one. That if you start off with a sleeper in Cult, you get to experience a game that is full of wonders and horrors in equal measure. And by the time you get your first advantage, man, you feel like a god. And that's literally, if you know anything about the game, how it should go. The other game that I just appreciate for the sheer thoroughness of it is Fading Suns, the old life path system that they used to use. I don't know if anybody has any experience with Fading Suns. It's science fantasy, but you start off with your childhood, your early career, your mid career, and then you can continue to choose life path options. It's very much like Traveler in that you can go on and on and on until you die in character creation. But those are my two.
Very nice. Alandra, what have you got for us?
Possibly an odd answer. I was thinking about this because the obvious one that I've played a lot of that is incredibly grounded in your characters being realistic, if you will, is Delta Green. But I'm actually going to say I recently had the pleasure of running a short shot of Vaesen. And one thing that all of my players discovered is that even though we were playing within a world where the other exists, the other world with these kind of powers beyond what we would consider human realism are very real, the mechanics of having to keep these secrets, always having to assume people are lying to you, having to parse out what is really happening, is there a monster or are people just exploiting fear? And even the mechanic of having this the Codex Obscurum, that is what the characters know about the monsters, lent this really wonderful sense of like realism and gravity to these characters who are trying to pursue a world where the monster might be real, but also people are the monsters and people are real. And it led to some really interesting conversations about how we pursue character development and how we evolve as characters in a horror game. So,
that's really awesome. All right, Sean, up to you.
Okay, so I don't know of a lot of games where the mechanics enforce a realistic character creation, but like Topher said, I do love life paths. I'm not familiar with either the ones you mentioned, but any game that uses them is always fun where you can end up. But on a realistic character bent, in Curseborn, your character has two torments, and one is all about being a monster and what type of creature you are, but the other is just a flaw that, from your human life, something as simple as, you push people away, or you always try and bring up the same conspiracy theory in a conversation, like it's the pup named Scooby-Doo. But that's all I have there.
I'm very much looking forward to Curseborn, getting my hands on it. I'm waiting for my backer copy still, but
it just got mine.
I know. I'm stoked and waiting. Mav, last but not least, let's go.
So one of my favorites for how it does character creation is Cosmic Dark by Graham Walmsley, which is sci-fi horror, and it was just kickstarted recently, but I had the pleasure of playtesting a lot of it. And it starts off with your group creating the planet you came from. You come up with the name, you come up with what it's like. Is it, the game master doesn't do any of that. You do. Is it a jungle planet, an ice planet, water, like all these different things? And then you create your characters who've all known each other since you were children. And the GM asks questions like, and sets a scene. So you and this character start a scene this way. When you were children, like when you were 13, you had this scene with this other character. Let's play through it. And so you play through that scene and develop your relationship with that character. Maybe it's antagonistic. I remember one where the starting line was, Mav, can you say, you know what I can do better than you, to the other character? And it set up this kind of little rivalry between us, and we decided whether it was friendly or antagonistic and so on. And then when you get to the game itself, often you're waking up in cryo, and this AI is asking you questions while you're still dreaming. So what do you fear the most, or how are you afraid of dying? In what way? Things like that. Just a couple of questions that you're answering in your subconscious state before you wake up. And it really grounds the character in place, like where you came from, also your relationship to the other PCs, and gives you that really deep kind of feeling about your character. Like, in what way are you afraid of dying? Well, I'm afraid of dying alone, for example. And it gives you something that you can act on in the scenario itself. Also gives the GM ways to mess with you, but it particularly gives you something to think about and include it in how it motivates your actions. And I really love that. I love that quite a lot, because there aren't character sheets in Cthulhu Dark or Cosmic Dark, so you're just building it narratively as you go, and it's just one of my absolute favorites.
That's awesome. Again, these are great examples. This actually flow quite well into one of the other questions I wanted to put to the group. It's not how I have it in order, but that then leads me to then ask this part because we've all said that we have to look at realism as a context to the world that is being portrayed. So if this is sci-fi horror, that realism for them would be very real, different from realism to us. And with horror having such unnatural or unrealistic premises, like how can we encourage players to be realistic, or to, as DMs, design realistic NPCs while subverting those expectations, or including more supernatural elements or sci-fi elements? Like that's I think that's the part of the hard balance here is, you've got the context of, you're in space. Everything is crazy. Like for your modern day person. So, again, open forum. This is where we descend into chaos. So feel free to speak up if you've got some thoughts on that.
So I think it's a bit foolish to try and be completely realistic, because no matter what you come up with, real life is weirder. So it shouldn't stress it too much. But the more things you keep grounded in whatever is realistic for your setting, the things that come out as, monstrous and horrifying, it really amps them up. So basically, don't make everything weird if you're doing, say, a modern day game. Just a few things, just one or two things, and keep it simple. But, fiction's bound to rules. Reality is not. So you have to pretend it's believable.
I think there's a lot of, you need to buy into the premise when you're getting your characters involved. Like one of my scenarios, for example, just to run off here, is Saturday the 14th, which is a slasher game, homage to 1980s slashers. And you're the crime scene team coming to clean up after the slasher event has happened. And you have to actively buy into the premise of, we're not just going to run away when things start happening. There is a way to stop them from running away in the game, but you have to have in general, your players need to buy into, well, in reality, I'm getting the hell out of here. But in the fiction, in the idea that this is a movie kind of thing, I stay and do the stupid thing. I go off into the woods by myself. I go check on the generator when the power goes out with just my little flashlight. I think part of the realism is buying into the premise and just discarding, like Sean was saying, some of the rules of reality, where it's, well, in the movie, my character would do this, not what would I do in this real situation if it was actually happening. So I think that's part of creating realism in the world you're in the scenario that you're in. What is real, what is true to the world that we're playing in. In this slasher, you're going into the woods by yourself. You wouldn't necessarily do that in real world because we've all watched slasher movies and we know better. But in this scenario, reality is you are going to do this thing because that is what the world that we've created is telling you to do.
So let's dive into that a little bit, just on that thought, because there are ways to kind of still have a realistic expectation, I think, of that. So, just for instance, the generator example, right? Power goes out, generator goes off. You're going to have to go out there. I mean, in those situations, the GM could always say something like, "Well, it's freezing cold, and if the generator isn't on within the next hour, you run the risk of like everybody in the room, like, it's going to freeze to death." So, I mean, I think there are ways of subverting that, but like, I'd like to know your thoughts on like how integral is the GM's role in reinforcing that realism through maybe external pressure or by changing something. Like, is that something that a horror GM, like a specific skill that they need to develop? And
if things are going well, not really. If the players are super involved, then they will push it forward. But yeah, the freezing example would be a good one. That okay, why am I going to fight a monster? Because you're going to die if you don't. Sometimes you have to force a choice, and also everyone there hopefully knows they're playing a horror game. So
you'd assume,
on the meta sense, that they want to see this happen. I mean, the character doesn't, but the players probably want to see what's going to happen when they go out there with their little flashlight.
Maybe this is my theater background talking, but it's something that I bring up a lot in TTRPGs as well. Part of the idea of realism is you have to buy into what your character would do, be that the backstory you've set up, the mechanics you have drawn in your pre-gen. If your character is the electrician, you've got to go repair the generator because you are the person who mechanically has that skill, which means that in the real world of the game, you know how to do that. And I think, as far as GM intervention, sometimes it's just reminding them like what skills can be used to solve a problem, even if it's counterintuitive. Again, the slasher example, like, I know you don't want to go in the woods, but you have really good survival skills like on your sheet, and finding ways to work those things into the narrative in a way where doing the thing that we ourselves would be like, hell no, actually feels intuitive and realistic because of the way that the world is presented. I've heard a joke that I adhere to very dearly in our good old Dungeons and Dragons, that the most important member of the party isn't actually the healer, it's the person who's willing to touch the obviously cursed item. Because we all know don't mess with that stuff, but for the game to move forward, somebody's got to touch it. It wouldn't be there if we weren't supposed to touch it. And I think that's even more true in a lot of horror games of that counterintuitive realism.
I think whoever's been running your games is kind of the mine, because mine will just throw cursed items at us just to see us suffer, like without any plot points. So your feet are flippers now. Good luck. You've got a swim speed instead of a ground speed. Enjoy that.
I think also to build on that is you as the GM can help your players build that kind of fictional realism into it, not just by looking at the character sheets or if you write the scenario, building that into the character sheet, but by discussing with your players, like if it's campaign session 0, or I like to have a 5 to 10 minute chat at the beginning of a session, even for a one shot of this is what the world is like. Here's how your character would act. Like in Saturday the 14th, they get a little spiel about this is a horror slasher movie. Approach your characters this way, like lean into the tropes. Hot Bro Summer, which is the reality TV. Like you are amped up characters on a reality show in 2010. And so how are your characters going to act in that oversized kind of way? And so like as the GM, that's something you can do to help your players along. Tell them, remember, you don't know this. Your character doesn't know this. You know this. Your character doesn't. Lean into this. And That's a tool I found really, really helpful, is having that little chat, like setting the expectations before the game, especially if you're playing something that's trope heavy or has a lot of weird things that your players might go, but I'm going to call the police, or I'm going to run away. I'm jumping on the shuttle and getting the hell out of here, kind of thing. So just from a GM perspective, you can help your players out quite a lot with building that fictional realism.
Swear there's a horror movie where they try doing that, and every time they do something, just the world doesn't let them do it. I'm pretty sure they call the cops, and the cop car gets hit. So
Tucker and Dale versus Evil, I think, subverts a lot of those tropes. Yeah,
it does. I'm thinking of I don't know what I'm thinking of, but that's depending on your world, especially if it's a movie-based world, that could be a way to sort of steer things back. That will hopefully not annoy the players.
You can also throw the realism back at them in game. We call the cops. Okay, the cops think you're crazy. Like the cops aren't going to listen to you. All right, you call the cops. What are you going to tell them about the big tentacly thing that you think is in the basement? Are you going to get more people in here and get killed? Things like that. You can also do, like, you can add to the realism by throwing it back at them when they do things like that. Well, my character would call the cops. Okay, so here's what happens. So I think that's another tool in the toolbox.
Mm-hmm. So Cryptic Fish and Link in chat had just had a nice discussion about using XP and momentum for doing the dumb but good story thing. So let's talk about that a little bit. So how would you, as either a designer, because I mean there's two aspects to this, obviously. You've got the design aspect where you kind of build into the game a description of how the game world is going to be. Like if you're going to make a slasher based game, then the expectation is there is some description within the game. But as a games master, or a storyteller, narrator, however you want to put it, there's obviously some onus to keep people on track with that. So how would you, as designers, not necessarily as game runners, or writers, or enjoyers of the game, what would you do as a mechanic to help encourage that behavior, if at all?
It's interesting because I was thinking about this in terms of sort of using the dramatic irony, as we were talking about earlier, in terms of like what that your character doesn't know. And I know we might kind of talk about how we kind of separate information of what we know and what our characters know. I think, like, not so much from a mechanical perspective, but particularly from a sort of how I approach playing horror games. My kind of ethos is just to lean into failing and not knowing things. So even without kind of like not so much for a mechanical reward, but for like a narrative reward, I guess, in terms of the story that we're wanting to tell together and collaborate on. It's like, I think particularly in starting to play horror games, you think you just want to switch off that part of you that's like, I need to win this. I need to, like, so in a way, I'm like, I don't even want stuff for it. Like, I'm not here to get boons for whatever. I'm like, nah, I want to know what happens when it all goes really fucking wrong.
It's always fun to have those players.
Yeah, it's to tell an interesting story. And I don't know if this is partly because I've just been doing actual plays and podcasting for quite a long time, so I'm always thinking about that audience as well, of like, what would people find interesting or entertaining, or and I think that knowing that everything's probably going to go really badly, and that's okay, and let's just see what happens. And that's why I love games like 10 Candles, for example, where it's like, you're all going to pretty much be dead at the end of the game. Like, you're screwed. See how that happens, right? There's no reward. I'm a masochistic player. I want to have a bad time.
Tragedy goblin your way through the entire thing.
Indeed.
I like that.
So yeah, I think it's interesting, but also, the idea, particularly for longer campaigns, perhaps, of having some kind of like mechanical rewards or things that keep you going through all the weird stuff. I think that's interesting as well. But yeah, I definitely, I don't know. I'm just like, let's just see how horribly this goes, I guess, is sort of my way of approaching it. Yeah.
Nice.
I know. Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I know, please.
Oh, I was going to say, I know as a GM of horror games, any chance I get for a player to interact realistically with the world at large is an opportunity for me to let them know that normal isn't normal. And skewing that normal in a horror game is almost an imperative.
I'm gonna ask you to give me an example here, like
Okay.
for our listeners.
I was running a cult campaign once, and one of the characters got arrested. And the primary power moving against them was Bina. So you had the Fraternal Order of Police actively working against the character. So once they got arrested, they were automatically in danger of being picked up again just by existing. And that threat carried through with every interaction with authority they had from that point going forward.
Nice. Okay.
But yeah, you to do the normal thing. When a character wants to do the normal thing, that's your opportunity. You can take that normal thing and just subtly twist it just a little bit, and it puts your players on edge. It lets them know that, okay, normal isn't normal. Safe isn't safe anymore.
Especially if you don't do it every time.
Right. And again, you can't do it every time or it loses its effect.
I was going to say one of the things I've loved recently that I think ties into this in an unexpected way is success at cost. Again, this came a bunch during Vaesen. Vaesen, I believe, is based on the Year Zero engine, and it is very difficult to get a pure success. It is much easier to get a success with a consequence, and then it is very common to just straight up fail. Two of the things that were great about that system, and I've seen this in other systems as well, that's just the one freshest in my mind, are when they got success at cost, I made the players define what the cost was so they could personalize it to their character, their objectives, and how it affected them. And that really grounded a lot of the realism of the stakes for those individual characters. Our writer, who is our like optimistic, hopeful, he's out here gathering stories, got progressively more and more like depressed as he realized that like people are just not as cool as they are in the stories, and things like that. And that was his active choice. That was the cost of him succeeding on getting the information he needed. And I think that was another way that really like that developed the world, and it was a way that the characters developed the world. I also love high risk, high reward systems, because I think in real life, you know, I'm at a point in my career where it doesn't exist anymore because my industry is gone. And so I'm having to reinvent myself at this age and in this time. So any move I make is a high risk, high reward choice that I have to decide on. And, you know, the stakes in games are a little bit more controlled and a little bit more confined, but there is a sense of realism to like, sometimes you have to just ask for the ballsy roll to see if you can get past the obstacle. And there might be consequences or danger to that, but there could also be extreme payoff if you're willing to do it.
If you're lucky, there's a story your friends will tell for years.
Also, if you're unlucky, I think they will tell it for years as well.
Depending on how you define the luck in that.
The hold my beer mechanic. Yes, I've used that one.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, well, let's key into another question here because we are getting very into the weeds here on detail. So I want to keep us moving a little bit forward. So, I want to talk a little bit about, because we talked a little bit about like short-term games and long-term games. So when we're looking at short-term one-shots, which are fairly common in horror situations, you know, like 10 Candles is like everybody's gonna die. You know, I only got introduced to 10 Candles yesterday. So like, but I love the idea of it. I love the concept. But you know, there's this pre-known thing that everybody's going to die, versus long-term campaigns where like there's a lot of character investment. Do you think in those shorter-term one-shots, like realism is less important or needs to be like less really considered versus like the long-term consequences of like a long-term campaign, like an investigative campaign? So again, open forum. Anybody has thoughts on this? Go ahead.
think there's a tendency for a lot of players, especially players like me and Camille, in one shots to be drive your character like you stole them. So you take thing like do all the things that you wouldn't normally do. Like there's that mindset for a lot of players of well, I'm just going to do the thing because there's no long-term consequences for it. I'm going into, say, Call of Cthulhu expecting to be driven mad or to die for a one shot or a 2 to 3 shot. I'm not expecting to keep my character long term. But when I was playing Horror on the Orient Express, I was thinking more long term. And I was thinking more in the terms of the realism of the world. Of there's a very real chance I lose my character in 5 sessions if I push it and do the crazy thing. So there's definitely a lot of thought for, well, at least for me, when it goes into playing the one shot short form versus playing the long form campaign. What might be realistic in the short form game is not necessarily realistic in the long form game. And again, it ties back into setting the expectations for the realism of the world. And so I think for a lot of one shots, it's very much you're expecting something bad to happen and it's going to happen very, very soon. So you don't need to build it out quite as much. Where the campaign you're going to, because most of us don't want to play 15 different characters in a campaign. I'm sure there's exceptions, but most of us want to be able to develop our character and ground them more over the course of at least 10 episodes or 10 sessions or whatever, depending on who you're playing it for. So I think there is a big difference, especially in expectation.
Yep, agreed.
In a shorter term game, if you can't rely on the players running off the rails right away, make them a little loose. Reality shouldn't be as firm, so to say. Like things that might hold up if you want to be super real, like, oh, you ran out of gas. Is that, unless that's supposed to happen, in which case, hey, you ran out of gas and you're in the woods, and now there's wolves howling. But you got to balance time very well, at least in a one shot, because, and I know I'm very guilty of this, is starting slow and in depth, and then, oh, there's a monster, and we're just going to narrate how this ends. You got to leave time for that, but it's also, you got to have the characters come to life first. So it's a bit tricky with when to do what. Especially because I'm a big fan of starting things normal. I love movies, especially horror movies, that feel like a different movie and then something terrible happens. Sinners is a big recent example. So you gotta get to know the characters, and you only have 3 hours to do that or so. You can't spend as much time as you may like. And especially if they're players that don't know each other, then they're going to be slow to necessarily get into character. So don't throw in narrative obstacles to what you want to do.
Mm-hmm. So to dive into that a little bit, though, how would you, for longer campaigns, how would you deal with the escalation? Because, like, obviously, if things are starting normal, to use Sinners as an example here, right? They're all normal. They're all having like a party in a barn. Spoilers for the people that haven't seen the movie yet. I highly suggest you go see it. But then like the appearance of like vampires and murder and stuff, and then like if you're in a longer term campaign, that has to taper back down again. So those the people in the movie are probably changed forever. Would you then have to look at how much you escalate for each time something encounters, or try and at least cool it off? Like, what are your thoughts on longer term campaigns for like the expectation of realistic actions from your players?
I could jump in on this from a player perspective, if that's okay, because
Please.
when I was looking at this question earlier, I was just thinking about how I personally find it easier to, I don't know if the right way to say it, but to kind of access a sense of realism, maybe in terms of just like remaining true to my character and who they are and what they would do, I find that easier in a shorter campaign, and perhaps it is because you are just kind of whittling it down into like, okay, I've only got a few hours to do this. Here's who I am. Here's what I'm doing. And we're going to go from point A of I'm a normal person doing my thing to, oh God, why? Yeah, at the other end, you know? And I think, whereas, for example, playing my character Jane Farewell, who I've played for about 5 years over our Two-Headed Serpent campaign now, I do think it is quite tricky to keep up that continuity, character-wise, over a longer campaign. And then also in terms of just, yeah, that long stretch over time of all these things happening and getting more embroiled in the weirdness and the horror and of that world where things are not normal anymore, how you kind of stick with that, which I really enjoy as a journey. But sometimes I do think like, God, if I listen back to the podcast and just like binge the whole thing, I'd be like, would my character be kind of making sense over that amount of time? You know, it's an interesting one, and like how you kind of, yeah, how do you maintain a sense of realism when so much stuff has happened? I guess spoilers just for our Two-Headed Serpent campaign, but my character basically starts off as like an investigative journalist trying to uncover some weird goings on at a medical organization, and then ends up completely embroiled in the conspiracy, part of everything that's going on, and sharing her head with an ancient serpent sorcerer called Shalasa. So it's like, how the fuck do you maintain realism in that? What is realism then? And how does that work? And I guess for me, like I was trying to think about it earlier, like what makes Jane still feel real to me? And I think it's like understanding maybe keeping kind of like a bit of an emotional through line in terms of like thinking about how your character might have changed, how they might stay the same, and then also in terms of feeling connected to that perhaps outlandish world that your character's in. You know, we were talking about sci-fi worlds earlier and like really out there things. Having that kind of empathy for your character and that emotional through line of like, why are they like this? How is this affecting them? Like, how are they doing? And I don't know, like if I've always struck the balance on it with Jane over the years, because she's been my first like very long-term horror character. But I think one example I think about that happened fairly early on in my run with Jane was that in terms of real world consequences for her getting involved more with the weird Cthulhu shit that was going on, is that she is a lesbian, like a butch lesbian living in 1930s New York. She is part of a commune. That is a huge sense of community for her. And basically, as a consequence of her getting more involved with all this weird shit, she gets let go from her commune. They say, look, you can't stay here anymore. And it's like, holy shit, this has got real emotional consequences for my character in terms of like, what are you letting go of? Like, what are you leaving behind to enter this strange new world of horrible fucking things that might kind of isolate you from who you were and what you knew, and what emotional things might come back in for you with certain things happening, and where does that come from? And so just kind of trying to, yeah, I guess trying to balance all that is quite tricky compared to like maybe a shorter campaign where I guess it's kind of you definitely don't have as much time to build that all, as Sean was saying. But then also, I guess for the longer term campaigns, yeah, that is that trickiness around continuing that realism. I don't know if that's the right word, but that sense of being true to who that character is and having that kind of realistic growth and change, I guess, over time is an interesting one. Yeah. I mean, also quite glad that we play in a pulp campaign because you're less squishy, which is nice. So you can be a bit less realistic. So again, comes back to setting too.
Clarifying question then.
Mhm.
Would you say that the grounding the consequences of being involved in horror in a very sort of realistic fear is what's helped you kind of like bring it back to earth? So like
Yeah,
obviously being removed
yeah.
from the commune, like everybody has a fear of not fitting in, of like losing things close to them.
Community and yeah. And
Yeah.
like Jane's boss at the newspaper she worked for got attacked by calls of Yig. That was a bad time. So kind of the uncomfortable smashing together of the weird, horrific, and also your normal life. I think that can be a great depth to plumb for again that sort of emotional response to like, oh God, this is like really, really fucking with that character's life. And, you know, I think that can help. And then also perhaps how you interact with other characters as well to kind of have that emotional, empathetic element bouncing off of each other of like, how is this happening to us and how are we dealing with it? Like, how's your mental health? Not great. How's your that kind of thing? I think can help as well to kind of so maybe an emotional realism, even if everything else is really, really weird. Actually,
love it. I love that perspective. Like to get that from a player's perspective is I think very rewarding for me as like a writer, and I'm sure for everybody else here as well. So it's nice. It's something to think about. Anybody else want to comment on long term versus short term before we move on to something else?
Yeah. I have kind of a sideways view on it, I guess, in that I have no breaks when I'm writing or running or designing. I treat reality like a nesting doll. And when you get your first glimpse and I open the nesting doll and there's your reality now. And then a session later, I open it again and there's your reality now. And so normal becomes a wish, a dream of home almost that you want to get back to, a longing for the characters. And I find it drives my characters, my players forward, knowing that they've lost this normal that they can never get back to now that they've changed, or the world has changed, or the universe has changed.
Then get out to get out, you have to go forward, kind of thing.
Exactly.
Nice.
I think that sort of goes with what Camille. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Alandra.
I was just going to really quick that I think that's so interesting because I find that I've been doing a lot of the reverse, which is hanging everyone on the de-escalation. I was going to point to minor spoiler if you've never seen or played it. Horror on the Orient Express is a great example. There's a timed component to that whole campaign where certain things cannot happen until another thing has happened. And so if you have encountered the character Fenalik, who I won't say anything more about, but if you've encountered Fenalik and you kind of know what his deal is, you are not looking forward to running into him again, but you don't know when it's going to happen because it's based on these other things that have to happen first. And having to contend with that, like, what do we do in the meantime? Are we in control of that timing? Is he in control of that timing? Whatever. I think lends itself to a different kind of realism of like, what do we do when we can't take action because we can't sit still? We can't just not do something. So it's a really interesting counterpoint there. Sean.
I was going to say that one of the things that keeps things realistic in these games is that the characters do change. If they just, went back to suddenly not, having that experience affect them, then that's strange, honestly. Things are going to change for their real lives, no matter what. They're going to collect, at the very least, a nice set of mental traumas. So it's fine that things get weird for them, as long as it stays grounded in what is the reality of the game and everyone's having a good time.
That's pretty good. Yeah, awesome. All right, so unless we've got anything else to that subject, let's move on a little bit to something else. I did have a question about where was it? Internalizing information that we have as players and designers. Things like we've kind of covered tropes a little bit already, and I think I kind of want to steer away from that because we've kind of covered that already. But I do want to go into a little bit about things like the utilization of realistic trauma in these horror events, and where there are lines that we have to draw as either players or developers, because obviously a lot of horror stems from real fears that we have, fear of the dark, fear of being ostracized, fear of the unknown, space, giant things, the sea. There's a whole bunch of fears that plays on. So in the search for realism, what are some of the pitfalls that you found that you need to stay away from to make sure that it isn't too realistic? How do you balance the act of like telling a horrible story without affecting the mental health of your players and making it not fun? Like, obviously there's things like safety tools and stuff, but is there like on a design point, how do you overcome those barriers? And I think Topher put his hand up there. So
I I don't know if this is going to be a controversial take on this or not.
we
I
love
hope it's not.
controversy.
I hope it's not controversial, because I'm actually a very sympathetic and kind game master when I run, and I'm very player centric and focused. But I feel like after you've covered lines and veils, because of my training in literature, that's where I got my start, was writing and authorship. You almost have an imperative to make people uncomfortable with things they say they're okay with in a horror game. You have to show the scene that makes you uncomfortable. You have to describe it, even if you're uncomfortable with it, because you owe it to your players to bring them that experience. Now, you don't do it. It's just like with everything else. You don't do it every session. It's salt. If you put too much of it in the dish, you ruin it. But you almost, I think you're almost given, when you're given the reins, you're given a mandate. We want you to make us uncomfortable. We want you to make us afraid of the dark. We want you to make us look over our shoulder when we leave the game tonight.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of trust involved.
There is. And I agree. We talked about this yesterday in yesterday's panel, where, like, you know, the people that we were talking with said, you know, as a player, you have a responsibility to also protect yourself. Like, if something is getting too high or too intense, that you need to let someone know or pull yourself out of it, you know. And then also there's the responsibility of the DM or the story runner to make sure that they're not doing something too aggressive, to not like bully people at the table, that kind of thing. But sometimes there are, I think, fears that come up in the middle of play, or because it's also a group setting, right? There are people of different abilities to tolerate certain levels of horror. Like, in the same way that some people love body horror films and other people are just like, oh, I can't even look at them, it's disgusting, but I'll watch a slasher fic, you know.
Right.
How would you navigate that then? Like, if you've got one person who's really into, like, I want to be just so terrified by having my arm split into like several different tentacles and I want body horror, and then another person's like super squicky, like, how would you handle that to keep some sort of level of realism? Because obviously if their tolerance for horror is a lot higher, like, they're probably going to be more okay with less realism than...
I would love to say that you know your players, so you know what you're getting into. And for a lot of people that's true, but I play with a lot of random people on the internet. And so I don't have the luxury of knowing my players. So there's three things that I won't start a table without, and that is a good session zero, where we talk about expectations, what we're okay with. We set our lines and veils. We have the conversation as adults. We're using that moment to suss each other out. Do I trust you to handle this? Yes. Do I trust you to treat this maturely? Yes. The other thing is absolutely an X card available at all times. And then I always incorporate some element of aftercare into a horror game, in the event there's any bleed or somebody comes up with a trigger they didn't know they had, and it took them 30 minutes to figure out that they're now a little bit distressed. I'm not a professional, but that is my fault that they got there. So I will at least try to talk them down a little bit.
See, that's something I've not heard mentioned a lot of, actually, is aftercare in the TTRPG space, which is that whole concept is fantastic to me. Like, and again, it's just something I haven't heard of until you just kind of mentioned it. Like, the
emotions run high.
Yeah, that's a carry on, Sean.
I was going to say, unfortunately, a lot of the time, people are busy and don't seem to have time for that. You know, I play with a lot of people that as soon as we're done, we got to go to bed. You know, we're old and we have kids, but it is an important thing when you can do it and maybe make time for it instead of just running for as long as people can stay awake.
Always try to go in. I always try to go in for something like that if I can, especially like with Friends of Dorothy, which Camille answered earlier. It's very, to tie into the topic of realism here, it's a very realistic setting. The characters are playing very real queer characters of the time period and so on. It can be, we're playing through queer themes and dealing with issues that people might find difficult. So at the end of the session, like we do check-ins in between scenes as well, but at the end it's like, okay, so let's have a 5-minute chat about how people are feeling, how you're doing. You got so into the realism of the character, and I can tell how real you felt everything happening to you was. Do you want to talk about it? Like what are the things that you need to let out? And that's something I try to do with every game. If people really need to leave, and I've noticed that someone was struggling a little bit, or they got really into it. I've had players actually crying at my table before, and I couldn't tell if it was the in character crying or the we're upset about this. So I message my players after a game if we're playing online. How are you feeling? I noticed this affected you. Like, do you need to talk about it? Like, things like that. So I try to do even virtual aftercare. If I can't do it after the session itself live, then I'll check in with people individually.
That's awesome. Like,
Yeah.
to go again into a topic we talked about yesterday, I think the golden rule for most of these games is just don't be a dickhead. You know, that's kind of, the overriding factor of making sure that everybody at the table is enjoying the time, having fun. Like, even if they want to tap it like horror topics, and I think that's great. Like, it's fantastic to hear that you all have that level of care for your players, and it makes me feel very good. Like to to get to talk to you also. Camille, did you have something you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I guess just back on the back of what you were just saying there, and I guess again I'm coming in from like a player perspective to also look out for your GMs as well.
Yeah.
I think that I guess sometimes as players we're not pre-planning things as much. I certainly will kind of turn up and be improving and talking shit like when I
Hmm.
come play games, and I think that yeah, it's also looking out for each other as well, as fellow players, and then also, because players could, I guess, bring in something that you weren't quite expecting, and you go, "Oh, okay." So there's that aspect as well, and yeah, just that things can change dynamically throughout a game. There could be something that you put on your consent checklist that you're fine with, that actually on the day you're like, I'm really actually not feeling this, or you're
Hmm.
feeling a bit more fragile, or you've just got other stuff going on. You've not had any sleep, and things can kind of get to you more than they could at other times. And so, just yeah, like how Topher was mentioning about always having the X cards and having those kind of like, as Mav was saying, kind of meanwhile in-game checks and things as well, and just viewing it as kind of an evolving aspect of games, particularly games that are covering sensitive topics, is important. I guess yeah, the other thing I just wanted to say was that I think I at least get drawn to horror because it can be quite explorative and cathartic in some ways, but then also balancing that with not actually being distressed. Like, I think we all kind of said after our Friends of Dorothy recording that all of us kind of cried at times, but I personally, because I was playing with people that I knew that I played with before, and because Mav had set things up so wonderfully in terms of like looking after ourselves and pacing ourselves, that it was a very cathartic experience. And that like it brought me a lot emotionally. I mean,
Mm.
it's not therapy. Let's be real here. It's not quite the same. I am a therapist now, so I can say that.
Hey.
Newly qualified. But I do think that there can be, particularly in sort of being able to explore these kinds of materials with people that you have that kind of trust with, maybe not someone you've just met for the first time, obviously, but having those kind
Mhm.
of yeah, those rules and those kind of outside barriers in place to be like, let's make this as safe as possible, and then being able to kind of explore that collaboratively and be looking after each other and having that sort of ethos. You can go to some really amazing places in terms of feeling real scared or maybe real
Mhm.
sad, or and kind of yeah, being able to experience those things in a safe environment. Yeah.
So just to dovetail off that a little bit, I do have very close connections with a charity called the Badana Group, that use role-playing games to provide, therapy and social skills to kids and teens, and it's incredible the work that they've done with role-playing games. And they recently shout out to them. And a little bit of a side note that I do have some vested interest in this. They recently released a game called Branch Riders, which I had the honor of doing monster art for, and it's great to see them it's becoming such a bigger thing now to use games to provide therapy or to help kids through socially difficult situations without them, triggering them directly. Having that proxy of having a character it's amazing.
How do you spell that? I want to look them up.
Badana Group. It's a Bodhana.
Awesome. Thank you.
The
That
Badana
sounds
Group. It's
awesome.
run by a guy called Jack Birkenstock Jr. He's probably one of my favorite human beings on the planet. Really, really nice dude. But yeah, they released a game called Branch Riders, and again, I will say ahead of time, I was hired to do work on it, so take what I say with a grain of salt.
I didn't realize it had come out.
Sorry?
I didn't realize it had come out already.
Yeah. No, it's done. Well, I think they just got the first prints, so so I think that's on its way. I'm not sure if it's available yet, so don't quote me on that. But so let's talk a little bit about catharsis. I think because I think horror games, and this is just anecdotal opinion to me. People look at horror, I think, for a different reason than people look at, say, action games. Action games is they're kind of more power fantasy. I think horror is a different form of catharsis. Certainly, anecdotally to me, when you're either running a game or designing a game, what kind of catharsis do you seek when you're running them? Like, just as a personal anecdote to yourself, what is it that you love about these horror games, running them? What venting are you doing? What part of the realistic part that you try to, what demons are you kind of, without going into obviously details here, but like, what's the general kind of reason that you write horror or you play horror? What really draws you to it as a player or a designer or a writer?
I think part of it for me, and this has always been why I've loved horror since I was a teenager, is the ability to explore things that are painful or scary or upsetting while knowing I have the power to stop it. Like, to get back to, again, Friends of Dorothy, which is queer horror, as a queer person, as a trans non-binary person with a lot of queer trauma and dealing with all the stuff that's going on right now, when I was writing it, when I run it, it's very much we're going to explore some of the trauma that we go through in a horror setting, but we know that we can stop it at any moment. So we can get that catharsis while we're playing through it. We can explore these themes, but also know I can X-card this. I can walk away from this. Even as the GM, one of my players in another game once said the X card is for GMs too. I can stop the game. I can end a scene. I can X card something my players do that is upsetting or whatever. And it gives me a space to explore, like, my fear of trauma, or my fear of, for example, claustrophobia, because I am a claustrophobic person. Like, all these different things, while knowing I have the power over it. It doesn't have power over me in this moment. And that's huge. Like, that is a huge thing. I can close the book and put it down. I can turn the movie off. I can stop playing this game. I've walked away from a table before because the trauma that was happening was too much and it triggered something. And I had the power to say, I'm sorry, I can't go on. And I turned off my computer and walked away. And that's an incredible draw of horror for me, is that exploration, but giving myself agency over something I might not have agency over in real life.
That really reminds me of learning more about trauma and how trauma responses form, and sort of how, if we're not able to be in fight or flight when something happens, to be able to actually take that moment to go, nope, I can say no to this, or I can move away, I can act, I can kind of like, be the gazelle running the fuck away from whatever's happening and be like, I've run away from that now, I've done something. You can process those feelings. And I think that in terms of horror being a proxy for being able to, oh, my door's just open because my cat's come in, by the way.
Hello, cats.
I don't have ghosts. I wondered when she was going to do this. She yells as well. So, yeah, in terms of being able to act and have that agency and that autonomy, like as Mav was saying, like I think that can be a really powerful way to have that feeling of that, even if in other places in our lives we haven't had that or can't have that, to almost practice that muscle of like, I can do that for myself. Yeah, I think that's really powerful. So Mav, I just really appreciated what you were saying, and it was just pinging off lots of things in my brain of yeah, maybe why gaming can be quite therapeutic or like, good for emotional processing in some ways, even if we are exploring the horrible ghoulies and awful things in the dark.
Mhm.
And pinging off of what you both said, I come from a background where I do not associate it with having a lot of trauma, but there was a lot of stricture. I come from a very religious upbringing. And there's like power structures involved there. And while that was not, for me, thankfully, a traumatic experience, even after kind of coming out and stepping away from the religion I was raised in, it starting for me in theater and then expanding from there into the TTRPG space, it was exploring the taboo and exploring how to break power structures. And I think so much of horror is about like how do the power structures fail us, or how do the power structures have to get subverted in order to succeed? The whole concept of like the final girl trope is that you take the most powerless individual in a realistic patriarchal society, and she is the only one who is able to successfully survive for whatever reasons. And there's things you can get into about that trope as well, breaking down why she gets to survive and what makes a final girl. That's a whole different panel that we could go on for hours about. But that idea of being able to explore power structures and taboo in a space that, again, much like with trauma, it's safe. You can walk away at any time. You can close the door at any time. And you can dip your toes in as gently as you want, or you can dive straight into the deep end with structure and rails on it before you do it in your real life.
Yeah. No, for certain. And tying back into the theme of realism here, ties to very real constricture such as religion, or just a strict household doesn't even have to be religious in nature. Like that rebellion, because the rules aren't the same as what you've expected or been told. You could even push that to like broader things like capitalism, without getting too on my soapbox about it. But like, I like all of this. This is great of a conversation. Topher, Sean, you got anything you want to add to that?
Well, I'm going to sort of cheat because the majority of the horror games I run and play are where you're playing a monster. So they kind of get to have both sides of that, because they get to experience things that are even worse than them, but they also get to indulge in some things that they never would do. Not necessarily like pure evil stuff, but you get to be, the sexy, confident vampire or something like that. And that's a different type of emotional release there, which just catharsis. So they can do that, but they can also deal with, ancient, monopolistic cults and horrors from beyond. So in that way, they sort of had the best of both worlds, even though it's not going to give you the full experience of one. You're sort of splitting the attention, but I think that is part of the appeal to a lot of people, because like you said, in an action game, you feel like you can kick ass. And if you're a monster yourself, the fear is different.
Would you say that the loss of humanity is one of those fears that also tie into things like, you know, the zombie trope, where I think I discussed this on a panel last year, how like the zombie trope is kind of like it's almost like a social fear, because it's people that you know doing things that are just abhorrent to like the social contract, and the idea that you too could be forced through instinct to just break that social contact by like attacking your family, attacking your friends. Like, would you say that the whole playing the monster horror is kind of like using that as a basis?
That is, and you generally, a large part of it is you're not who you used to be, and you know that it's more personal horror in that way than dealing with cosmic threats that are incomprehensible. So it requires a different kind of buy-in from a player.
Mhm.
You're not trying to scare them, you're trying to make sure they scare themselves.
That's very good. I like that as a soundbite. You're not trying to scare them, you're trying to make them scare themselves. I like that. Topher, you got anything?
Yeah, I was just going to say everybody has such well-reasoned and psychologically grounded responses to this, and I just like spooky shit and scaring my friends.
Absolutely valid. That's absolutely valid.
All my horror writing and horror stories, I predominantly run Cult Divinity Lost, and I have since 1993. I got a copy of it, read it in '93, the first U.S. edition, and looked at Call of Cthulhu and Chill and Nightlife, and I was like, okay, y'all are cool, but you're not this. um, but all my storytelling deals with, in some way, shape, or form, themes of loss when I'm telling a horror story, whether that's a loss of self, a loss of stuff, or just a loss of status. In some way, the characters begin from a position of loss and have to start making it up from the very beginning.
Does blood loss count?
It can.
Well, for vampire, it would.
Uh,
I don't want to fully derail this train, but I am reminded so strongly of a panel that I attended several years ago at a gaming convention, and they were talking about creating TTRPGs for kids. And the quote that has stuck in my head forever has been, children love murder and crime, and you have to keep that in mind. And I feel that's so strongly because I feel in some ways like when I get to play horror games, I am the child, where it's like I want to explore, trauma, I want to explore taboo, I want to explore, and sometimes I just want to do spooky things. Sometimes I just want to go hit people with a baseball bat because I can't do that in real life, but I can in a zombie apocalypse.
well, so okay, so let's dovetail this conversation off a little bit into that kind of realm, because like we've kind of gone off track from the planned questions that I had. I think we've covered a lot of what I wanted to cover. But let's look at that, because there's obviously some freedom in, like you say, the catharsis of like I can pick up a baseball bat and start swinging. Would you say then that the realism then for playing a character in these horrible situations is to be able to look at these things that are abnormal and then be able to have abnormal reactions to them? So like if for example, Alien, right? You're on a spaceship. You probably don't want a firearm anywhere in a normal like situation, right? But like this thing starts crawling out the vents and starts eating all your friends. Yeah, you're gonna pick up a gun, and yeah, you're gonna go try and hunt it down, or like kill box it. Like, I do you think that abnormality of the situation does in fact play into the realism of like keeping the realism of the characters' reactions purely because of that abnormality? Like, how much should we lean into that? Like, do you know of any systems that kind of utilize that premise? Like, what are your thoughts?
You've stumped us.
Excellent. I've done my job. I have won this game.
There's something at the edge of my brain about how it's I think what Topher was saying, and I think what many people have said is that it is about subverting social normality, or what we perceive as social normality. In Alien, it is a perfectly realistic response to be like, something's crawling out of the air vents, I need to go find a firearm and empty it into this thing, right? Like, that is actually the most realistic gut instinct you could have. If I was at my office job during the day and something started crawling out of the air vents, that is an irrational response to have that would not be socially accepted in the world in which I currently exist, conceivably. And so I think that when we're talking about realism, that subversion of our social mores versus the social mores of the system we're playing in is where that kind of realism butts up and recreates itself.
My realism is not the same as your realism. Not to get all mage about it, but it greatly does depend on the game.
Oh, for sure.
So let's go into things like game mechanics then, because like in Alien you have stress. In Curseborn, I believe you have like curse dice that you lose, and that kind of like brings you closer to this kind of like monstrous self. That so like for like a shifter, for instance, like they cannot like resist shifting into their war form and going in like 8 or something like that, as an example.
Yes.
Do you think that that kind of mechanic is almost permission to act unrealistically as a player? Is that mechanic giving the player the permission to act unrealistically, and should that be used as a tool to kind of let them take the reins off a little bit?
I think in Curseborn it's explicitly that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question about that.
Sure.
Is it acting unrealistically if it's supporting the fiction of the game? Or is it realistic to the fiction? A character who inadvertently shifts, if that's a game mechanic, that would be them realistically portraying that character, I would feel.
No, I agree with you. My question, I suppose it's more of a kind of like a meta psychological question in regards to the player itself, because again we've already discussed about like context is important for the game depending on what you're playing in. If everybody's playing something that's fundamentally cursed, then yeah, shifting is probably not going to be that much. But like for the players themselves who might not be used to, say, it's someone who's first time playing Curseborn or Vampire the Masquerade or Werewolf of the Apocalypse, they're not used to playing monsters. They're used to playing like D&D or Pathfinder or something where they're the heroes and they're fighting monsters. Do you think those mechanics are kind of like a way of basically giving them permission to like let the reins off, and can that be used in that sense down the road, like for other story mechanics?
I think that has changed a lot in the past 30 years or so. A lot of the older games had mechanics that would force you into it. Particularly Vampire and Werewolf would have frenzy mechanics, where that does give you an excuse, but it also means that you can't necessarily avoid it. Even as in Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition, every time you do something, there's a chance you're going to be a little monster. But for the shift example in Curseborn, you can do it whenever you want, but your character doesn't fall into their damnation state unless the player wants to, which they're encouraged to do so because it's more fun and you get curse dice back, but you don't have to suffer just because some bad dice rolls. You get to suffer because it's fun.
Is that leaning in and that intentional failing? I guess maybe, I mean, I've been sort of playing TTRPGs for the last decade or so I've not really had like as much of a background in that, but I guess, yeah, maybe it sounds like there has been more of a cultural shift towards people going, yeah, I can go with this and do this kind of play, and look into this kind of character more so than kind of your sort of, I don't know, like advanced D&D sort of stuff back in the day. Kind of like, it sounds like there's been more of a shift towards but narratively this could be juicy, like even if you're not winning, kind of thing. Yeah, that's really interesting.
And
I think agency. Oh, sorry,
Agency.
Matt, carry on. Yeah.
Oh, I was gonna say, I think giving your players things like cursed objects or spells or whatever doesn't mean that it's going to be a narrative, here, go and fuck everything up, or act unrealistically. It gives them tools to build more realism into their character, just advancing the horror along. Like when I was playing Horror on the Orient Express, I developed the ability to set things on fire, essentially, by thinking about it. And there came a point about halfway through the campaign where, losing a lot of sanity and being exposed to a lot of horrible things, there was this person who was getting in our way, and I was scared. My character was scared. My character was angry and just wanted to get through this fucking thing because we needed to move to the next section. We were in danger. And so she just set this man on fire by thinking about it, because she was in this emotional state, which was a normal, realistic thing. And her reaction was to use the thing that she'd learned how to do, because this is a solution to the problem, which I think was completely realistic for the character at the time. And I think that's what tends to happen in the games that I've seen played in, the games that I've run. Giving people these methods actually enhances the realism in a lot of ways, because it's real to the character. Using that tool, using that cursed item. I'm going to use this spell even though I know it's bad for my brain because I lose sanity when I cast it, because it's a way for me to react to this situation. Things like that. I think it's actually a very helpful tool, especially when you're in a long form setting, like a campaign.
No, that's great. Yeah, no, for sure. I'm looking at our time. We have about 20 minutes left. This has been a wonderful discussion so far, by the way. You are all very gifted in this field, and I am very happy that we got to talk to all of you about this. I'm going to see if there's any questions in chat. If you want to start posting up questions now, we can start moving into that. I got a question for you all. What has been the most terrifying thing that you've encountered as a player? Like, something that really, like, grounded you as, like, this is absolutely awful. Like, not necessarily disgust, but just, like, as a player, like, a realistic, like, oh yeah, my player's in danger. Like, I was not expecting this. Do you guys have like a moment that you want to share, something that felt very sort of realistic for your characters? Like, Matt's example of the setting someone on fire. No, that's the forever GM curse. I know. Or like you could even say like something that you have inflicted on a player that you're very proud of, for them to look at you and go, "Wow, that was awful."
I can't think of any specific times other than a very silly one that I don't think I need to bring up. It involves Fred Astaire.
We love silly as well, and I'd love to hear about Fred Astaire now. Like,
this was quite a long time ago. I might have been in high school. The friends, they had a friend who went by the name of Dr. Feelgood, and he had betrayed them, and they found out because they called him, or they called who they thought was Dr. Feelgood, and the guy who was about to, like, who had just captured them answered the phone. And they were so mad at me. And also that Nosferatu used to be Fred Astaire in that game because I was in high school. Yeah, I thought it was fun.
It's the games that stay with us, though, right? Anybody else got some good examples of like a really awesome?
I played in a Delta Green game where there were a couple of really great moments in a couple of different games with the same GM, but there was one where we were all playing Cal students in the 70s trying to pull a prank on Stanford. This is a famous rivalry in California, the Cal versus Stanford rivalry. And it reached a point, this was a short shot, and it reached a point, I think, by the end of like our third session where I was the only character left who believed that the thing that had happened to us had happened to us. So going into the next session, it was going to be either I can convince everyone to come over to my side, or every one of my friends thinks I am crazy. Thinks I am the crazy one. And I ended up being the first one to die. Like halfway through the final session, I died and got to play as the Delta Green agent who was sent to wrangle us for the rest of the session.
Nice.
Because I was the only one who believed that this was actually happening, and it took my death to get everybody back on board. So that was pretty intense.
That's very cool, though. I've still not played Delta Green. I've got to play Delta Green at some point. Anybody else? Any class examples?
One thing that came to my mind, maybe not the most kind of like, I guess, seismic example of a massive thing that happened, but I remember when I not long joined How We Roll, and I was playing from our sort of Oklahoma chapter of Two-Headed Serpent onwards. So like mild spoilers for that chapter here in case anyone hasn't run it. Or we're sort of in Oklahoma. We're in this kind of very Dust Bowl small town, and it's kind of setting it up as just like, a normal place full of normal people, kind of. And there's just one bit, and I think it's partly a testament to Scott Dorward's gemming style, because he always just sounds so affable and so agreeable, and just like, yes, and you're looking at this, and then this happens, and da da da, and they could just be describing the most hideous things in such a just like, lovely kind of way, and you're just like, damn you, Scott. I think that he does really well with that, and I just remember there's a scene where we see like a woman up on the roof of a house, and she's just like really happy-go-lucky and like, oh, so nice to see you, and she's just like peeling her skin off while she's talking to you as if like nothing's happening. It's just the most normal thing in the world. And you're just like, oh God, oh yeah. It's just that kind of like a little bit of body horror there to be like, oh, okay, something's really not right here. And then there's another bit where there's another woman that I'm interviewing in a house who's like, oh, sorry, my baby keeps crying. I'm going to go upstairs and check on the baby. And I'm like, I want to see this baby. I'm going to go see the baby. And it's like, again, just such a normal scene. And then the baby's kind of a lizard. And you're like,
oh, no.
Just horrible.
Kind of feeds into that midsummer vibe.
Yeah, very much. Like everything's
summer
great.
Celebration, that's great. Oh, he just threw himself off a cliff. It's no biggie.
Like, oh boy. I think my character passed a sanity check on seeing that baby, and then since then I played it. She's got a soft spot for the lizardy and the serpentine. So just those little things, and especially the way that Scott delivers the blows. It's quite inspiring. So basically, damn you, Scott.
I think the most horrible thing that tend to happen to my characters is when they think they're doing the right thing, and it turns out to have horrible consequences. Spoilers for the end of Bleaker Trails with Ain't Slade. My character Patience does what they think is the right thing to do. They stop something from happening, but it turns out to be the exact wrong thing to do, and the world ends up changing because of it, and they lose everything, and they become sort of this half mad oracle who's doomed with this realization that they did something wrong, in addition to all the other wrong things they did throughout the campaign. But they thought they did what they thought was right, but there's the horror of understanding they did the wrong thing and having to live with those consequences. That when those things happen to me, that tends to be the most horrible thing. It is the horror of those realizations and having to live with what comes next.
Well, Link in chat has just said that they would adopt the hell out of that lizard baby. So I think you got a fan there.
Cute,
lizard
confirmed.
baby for the win. 2025. So there are a couple of questions in chat. I just want to run by. So we're going to make it real quick, like lightning fast for this because we're running a little low on time. Kay asked earlier about methods to do aftercare if people are short on time. Do you have any quick suggestions of how you can do that?
Okay, the open door is always open. Even if you're short on time, you can always make time to talk to a player after a game. You don't know how long it's going to take them to process what's going on. So that's the real quick way. If you're real quick, if you're real short on time, let's say you wrapped up the game, you're at a con, you got a panel in 10 minutes, everybody's got a game in 10 minutes, whatever. Just throw out a real quick stars and wishes. What did you enjoy? What needs work or what would you like to see improved upon? That gives everybody a kind of no fault, I'm here for your feedback. They can give you kind of an earful if they need to then. I don't know. I've never had a confrontation after a game.
No. And yeah, like especially if you're like Discord players, Discord is one of those things where you have access to all the time. Like and as a player, you should never feel afraid to talk to your GM. Like if you're fearful of your GM's wrath for saying something, then they're probably not the right GM for you. Like,
How do I get that to happen?
Again, golden rule: don't be a dickhead.
Horror for in the game, not out of the game.
Yeah. Well, and there is no inappropriate time for you to voice your concerns. I think, like if you have a concern, there is no inappropriate time for you to turn around and say, "Hey, I need to talk to you about this. I had a feeling about this that I need to clarify, like, and would like to avoid or would like to." Sorry, Topher, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, you should always, at any time, at your table, if you don't feel like you can speak up at that table and say something to those people, that may not be the right table for you. Because at the end of the day, even when I have a bunch of brand new players at my table online that I've never met before, my first thing to do there is become friends with everybody at that table. That's my first job, is to become friends with everybody there. Because until we're friends, you're not going to trust me, I'm not going to trust you, and we can't tell a story until that happens.
It's a good way of doing it. Great way of doing it. Anybody else want to add something to that before I move on to the next question? All right. So Cryptic Fish has a quick question, and again, we'll keep this pretty quick. What are your experiences of open or closed tables with regards to player information, uninformed and paranoid, or informed and waiting for the axe to fall? What has been your experiences with those kind of differences in games? And I know that's kind of probably a bit more loaded question than a quick question, but just if you briefly say closed information versus quick information, like how you've seen players react.
Generally, a bit closed, but it depends so much on the tone of the game as well. If you're running an espionage game, that's buttoned up tight. But if you're playing a game where everybody has to buy in and be comfortable with stuff, then yeah, there's going to be some discussion of what might happen and what they want to happen. And some games even have that built into the mechanics. This is what the characters want to happen, the players want to happen. So it's not going to ruin everything if they know that something is happening. Many of them will figure it out, and what they think is going to happen with what you tell them is going to be worse than whatever you came up with.
I guess it's also, as a player, knowing the difference between your in and out of character knowledge and being able to, as we kind of touched on a bit earlier, practicing it, not metagaming too much. I mean, I know that there'll always be a certain amount of bias in how much you know, but if you do know more things, kind of really trying to just check in on yourself and be like, yeah, but my character doesn't know that, so what would they actually do? And that is a way that you can stick to realism and being realistic to that character and what you've set up for them and who they are. So I guess being able to juggle between those two. But yeah, I imagine even for the most seasoned player, it can be hard not to metagame when you know certain things, and to kind of still be able to lean into that dramatic irony of what you know versus what your character knows. So I guess but particularly obviously with balancing with anything that might be triggering or might be quite difficult content-wise, kind of balancing that with then having the mystery and not quite knowing what's going to happen as well. Yeah. So depends.
Awesome.
Depends. Such a useful answer.
I think everything in this panel could be said. Context is important. Every question has been pretty, but the panel's about realism and realistic character development. So I think it's a great topic just to talk about, like how to maintain that kind of like that tie to realism. Anybody else want to add to their experiences here in like short form versus long form, or because I'm assuming something like 10 Candles is like what we would consider like a high player knowledge, like you're gonna die, so maybe that's
you're gonna die, and you create the truth of the world every time a candle goes out. Every time a candle goes out, you go around the circle and everyone states truths about the world, so you can actively remold the world as you play. It also has a really amazing high buy-in of you're not going to do anything that retcons the existing world, because that defeats the point, because you all have to die at the end anyway. Right. I think that's truly one of the most emotional games that I think I've ever gotten to participate in, and I highly recommend it to people. It's very fun, and it doesn't have to be horrific horror. The whole point of the game is hope. We didn't talk about that much in the context of realism, but I think hope has a very strong place in realism when you're talking about horror.
Well, because then everything becomes nihilistic, right? What's there to fight against if you've got no hope of survival? That's But then, like you say, with 10 Candles, it seems like that is still present, even though the premise of the game is everybody dies. I've really got to play that game. Like I said, I only found out about it yesterday, so I really want to get into that game. So if any of you are running one, let me know. I would love to join in.
I only found out about it about 10 minutes ago, or about an hour and a half ago. So
yeah,
I've heard it in passing.
I don't know. Has anyone played it online before? Because I've only ever played it. Right. I'm very intrigued as to how that works. And yeah,
I have only played it online. Ooh. Thanks, COVID.
Indeed, yes. Yeah, I mostly play everything online, but with a couple of in-person groups of friends. I've played it before, and it is very atmospheric when you're all sat around the table and like snuffing out the tea lights one by one. I'd be very intrigued to hear more about, kind of transferring that feeling of it online and how that works.
That's okay. I need to learn more about this game, evidently, because now it sounds like there's props involved. I'm all about that.
You get to burn pieces of paper. It's great.
Oh my god! All right, let's go that arsonist hit to it. That's awesome. Yeah. Any like last thoughts before we do outros, because we are kind of running up on time here? Is there anything you would like to say as a piece of advice to players getting into this for the first time, like new horror players, new GMs? Like, is there any piece of doesn't necessarily have to be about realism, but just in general, what advice would you give new people to the genre?
I would
Don't play to win.
Yes.
That's my advice, is don't play to win. Because that's not the goal here. It's not a fantasy game where your goal is to slay the dragon and end up with 5 million XP and become a demigod by the time you reach level 20 or whatever. That's not the goal here. You're exploring things, and you may end up in a bad position, and that's okay. And you need to be okay with that going into a horror game.
Topher, were you going to say something? Or Alandra? Anybody?
Topher, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to reiterate a little bit of advice I gave earlier for GMs, especially getting into this. For players, expect to be uncomfortable. If your GM is doing their job right, then you're going to be uncomfortable a little bit. That's what you signed up for. But don't be afraid to push that envelope. If you're thinking a scene is going to make your players uncomfortable, don't be afraid to talk to those players about it before you do that scene, because chances are it will make them uncomfortable and they'll thank you for it. But you've got to handle it right, and you're not going to hurt anything by talking about your players about something you want to do.
TTRPGs are collaborative storytelling, so collaborate and tell a story.
It's like the core fundamental principle right there. Absolutely. Well, I think this has been a great discussion. Thank you all. I'm going to give you all the opportunity to say again who you are, where people can find you on like social media, if you're working on any projects that you want people to look at, and generally just give yourselves an outro. So I'm going to go reverse order this time. So Mav, we're going to start with you.
Oh, okay. So I'm Mav.
I think
My
is that
pronouns are they,
reverse
them.
order?
Oh, I started last time, so.
Well, we're going to do it the same order then. Whatever.
Okay. So I'm Mav. My pronouns are they, them. And I am the head of Mythos for the Old Ways podcast, running all sorts of tentacular horror, including Trail of Cthulhu, Silver Screams, our 1930s campaign. You can find me on Ain't Slayed Nobody, How We Roll, Symphony Entertainment, and a bunch of other things at various and sundry times. And you can find my scenarios for Call of Cthulhu on the Miskatonic repository under the author name of Rena Henze, including scenarios we've mentioned here, like Saturday the 14th, Friends of Dorothy, Hot Bro Summer, and Jolene, and a few other scenarios as well. And I've got a couple scenarios outcoming, including The Man Who Sold the World, which is a 1970s scenario, which is David Bowie themed, and a scenario in the upcoming Year of the Goat anthology, collection of scenarios all about Shub. And you can find me on Discord and social media as Maverick of Mayhem.
Perfect. I'm going to change it up. Topher, you're next.
Ooh, okay. Let's see. I'm Topher Burk. I've got a couple things published on DM's Guild under Topher Burk. You can find those pretty easily. And I run games professionally on Start Playing. You can find me on startplaying.games/GM/UNC.
Awesome. Camille, you get the Wheel of Fortune.
Yeah, I'm Camille. I am basically from How We Roll. That is my main home. They keep me fed and watered, which is lovely. So yeah, if you want to check out How We Roll podcast, I'm in quite a variety of stuff there. I've also variously appeared on a few different podcasts here and there as well. So you feel like, it's them again. They're back. And if people want to catch up with what I'm doing, I am on Blue Sky at Camille Brews. That's CAMI and then brew like a cup of tea. So that's kind of where I usually post about things, what I am doing in terms of TTRPGs. Yeah, really cool to hear from everyone. Every time I'm in these panels, I'm like, man, I should start doing some writing and running things. Sounds really fun.
Don't start it. Don't start.
Now I want to do it even more. No, my demand avoidance. You've activated it. So yeah, thanks so much, Beth, and everyone for a wonderful panel.
Awesome. Sean, you're
up. Once again, Sean Creef, he, him. You can find me on Start Playing, where I do run games occasionally, and also you can find my community and other content on Drive Through RPG, and hopefully not on any pirate sites anymore.
Alandra, last but not least.
I am Alandra Hileman, aka Lady Bedivere. You can find me at Lady Bedivere anywhere that your socials mediate. Please follow me. I am Queen of the One Shots over on Quest and Chaos. You can also spot me sometimes on Miskatonic Playhouse and Vanna Loswin, and a variety of other places. And next year, I'm going to have a lot of fun new projects coming up. So please feel free to follow me. I am chronically online. So if you want to talk more about things, also please hit me up on any of those socials, and I am happy to chat with you about writing, DMing, the state of theater in the US, or anything else.
You just got to follow from me. So, and I've been your moderator. My name is Bear Winters with Tapham Systems. You can find me at Bear Winters on Blue Sky and bear.thr on Instagram. You can also check out my game at projectbiomodus.com. That's BIOMODUS. And just a bit of personal news, I am looking to go to Kickstarter probably in the middle of next year for a new game called Treadpunk, which is an 80s, 90s anti-corporation game where the people play a crew of a tank and you basically go and blow up Spartas on warehouses. So, yeah, have fun with that. Thank you, everybody, again, for indulging me in my questions and giving your absolutely fantastic answers. I am singularly honored to be in all of your presences. And thank you again for David for being our support in the background. And have a wonderful night, everybody. Stay tuned to the con. There's plenty more to come. Have a
Thanks for having us.
The scene closes. The curtains fall.
Woo.